Hello again. Welcome to the Thinking the Unthinkable podcast, our latest leadership conversation. I'm Nik Gowing. How willing and prepared are we all for the enormity of change we face for a multiple of often sinister reasons? That's what this conversation will focus on. I was very struck by the 10-minute appearance of a leading bank CEO at the Innovation Zero conference in London recently. On what is needed to tackle climate change, he told all of us sticking by the status quo will not get us where we need to be. His message, we've done remarkably well on the first half of the transition needed, which most of us didn't really notice as it was happening. But the next half will be a lot harder because it has never been done before. A new collective appetite for risk is needed. We must change that appetite, he emphasised. So welcome John Flint, CEO of the UK's National Wealth Fund, born out of the Infrastructure Bank for the UK. You're responsible for, and I quote, financing capital investment needed to deliver the UK government's policy growth and clean energy missions, generating a return for the taxpayer and crowding in of private capital. John was previously Group CEO for the banking giant HSBC. So, John, a warm welcome. Why the alert from you that sticking by the status quo will not get us where we need to?
Yeah, an important time to be having this conversation. So I'm very grateful, Nik, for the invitation to do this. I spent the last 4 years building a new policy tool in the government policy toolkit that seeks to catalyse investment into the broader industrial strategy of the country, but particularly into the climate transition. So we sit between government finance and private sector. And as you indicated, I spent the early part of my career as a steward of private capital. I've learned an enormous amount over the last 4 years about how capital is deployed and how risk is taken and shared across the system. And I think we are rightfully proud in the UK that we're the first G7 nation to halve our emissions on the route to net zero. But I'm equally struck that, we're having this conversation at a time when the government's fiscal constraints are very real. The next 50% is going to be, by definition, more difficult. We've picked the low-hanging fruit. We now have to deal with decarbonising our homes and our built environment. We have to decarbonise travel. We have to decarbonise the harder-to-abate sectors like cement, etc. And we've got some of the technologies we need to do that are commercially deployable at scale, but we don't have all of them. And after 4 years of sitting at this nexus between public finance and private finance, it's just clear to me that the way that we are currently operating, the status quo, the institutional rigidities in private sector finance, that's not going to be enough to get us the rest of the way to net zero.
So it's as bold as you put it. The status quo will not get us where we need to be. Why is the next half of the transition going to be, as you put it, a lot harder?
I think for two principal reasons. We've picked the low-hanging fruit, as I've already said, and we've left the harder problems for now. But also, there's a requirement now to engage with the citizenry a lot more broadly on this transition. In your introduction, Nik, you reminded us that most people didn't notice that we decarbonised 50% of our emissions.
Well, that's your view, of course, John. I was quoting you.
That's absolutely my view. We're proud of the fact, but if people reflect back, we didn't have to change the way we lived in the UK. Right? We didn't. No one really noticed. A lot of the first 50% was about taking coal out of the energy supply. But from here, it's going to be different. Our housing stock is very inefficient. The way that we travel, it's changing, but that is still very inefficient. The way that we feed ourselves potentially has some challenges as well. So what we have to do now is, if we're going to get to the legally binding commitment of net zero by 2050, we're going to have to take everyone with us. And I think that means, in particular, for those of us in leadership positions, those of us in government and private sector actors, we've got to get really good at making the rest of this transition easy for consumers. if we make it easy, it can happen. If we don't make it easy, this will be an issue. It will be a political issue. It will be a social issue. So that's what I meant by
You're being
the next
quite
bit being
political
harder.
here, if I may say, John. I mean, what you're saying is that, and I'm interpreting you, and put me back in my box if you want, but you're saying that in many ways, the government, whoever it is, has got to be more active and engaging. You call them citizens, the people, the consumers, the people who've got to live in a country like the United Kingdom and live in a different way. But at the moment, there seems to be a degree of fear of putting it as bluntly as it needs to be put. You've got to change the way you're doing things.
I think it's a responsibility for all of us who've got a leadership position, whether public servants, whether we're in the private sector, to create, to meet people where they're at, to create a constructive narrative that allows people to engage positively on this subject, on this transition, to get them to understand the trade-offs, to get them to understand the merits and demerits of taking action now or not taking action now. And it's a hard thing to do. I mean, it's a genuinely hard thing to do. We've not done this before. We have not. No industrial economy has decommissioned a high carbon, no longer fit for purpose industrial economy and built a new green economy in parallel without disturbing the status quo. It's not been done, and I do think it's important when you're facing a challenge like this to acknowledge the magnitude and gravity of it. So it gives you a bit of space and a bit of permission to say, well, this isn't going to be easy, and we're going to get some of this wrong, and we're going to get some of our messaging wrong, and we're going to get some of, some of our initiatives and some of our capital allocation wrong as well. But there's no alternative. The status quo will see us well short, I think, of net zero by 2050. So
Now, let me quote back to you what you said in the hall in front of about 500 people. We must make it easier for consumers to understand. Quote, we must not leave them feel being beaten around the head. In other words, making this feel positive as opposed to a liability.
Yeah. So if you look back to the way in which we've digitized a lot of the economy, the way in which consumer journeys have changed, the way that we engage with our banking apps, the way that we shop, etc., the way that we use modern technology to change the way that human beings do things at scale. One of the things we've learned is if you can create a customer journey that's easy for people, you can have exponential growth in the rate of adoption of something. Things can change very, very rapidly when it's easy. If it's not easy, nothing happens, right? Because people will not engage. So the reason that I use the making it easy phrase is, if we do want to change the way, for example, if we want to change the rate at which people will make their homes energy efficient, we have to make it easy for them to do that. And at the moment, it's a challenge. It's a real struggle if you want to do that. You have to understand technology. You have to understand money. You have to, in some cases, navigate planning, permissions, etc. So I think in all of the ways in which we need to engage the consumer, having this obsessive focus on making it easy is a key unlock. Because we said lots of recent history that says if you can make it easy, then adoption will accelerate. But I also think there's a responsibility and a great opportunity, actually, for us to refresh and reframe the narrative around climate change. It's a threat. It's something that we are made to feel guilty about. It's a negative. And there's an awful lot to deal with right now. There's not much on our news feeds that makes you feel good about any aspect of life on planet Earth just now. And climate change is another obligation on all of us, a collective obligation, an individual obligation. I've reinforced the message that it's going to be difficult. And there's people have a finite capacity for dealing with that. And so, and what I think we see in response is people switch off. They don't want to hear about it anymore. They don't want to engage.
That's what the polling shows very clearly. Even though someone like Rachel Kite, the special advisor to Ed Miliband, the DESNZ Secretary of State, said at a lecture a couple of months ago, she said, we've got to have a new narrative. We've got to have a narrative which the public understand, they appreciate and want to move forward with.
Couldn't agree more. We've got to find a narrative that engages people, that doesn't make it feel like people are telling them what to do. Nobody at any age really likes to be told what to do, but people are curious, and if they can get there in their own time with their own thinking and decide to join a particular movement or to change the way that they're doing things, that can be really, really constructive. But we do have to refresh this narrative. I really enjoyed, up until about a year ago, a contrast that I enjoyed making was the fact that climate change wasn't really a political issue in the UK, whilst it was in the US. And you could just look across the pond and you could look at how the Democrats and the Republicans were using climate change as an instrument of political division. And over time, there's a suggestion now in the UK that climate change and climate policies are beginning to infect the regular debate. And I think that just reminds us even more, to Rachel Kite's point, we need a new narrative. We need a narrative that people feel good about, or at least, at the very least, don't feel threatened by.
Well, obviously, there's a polarization going on, particularly with the success of reform. They've made it very clear. Let's not get into that at the moment, because there are a couple of other things we've only got limited time. There are a couple of other things I'd like to just hear from you, because, you do have the advantage of having been a banker for your professional life. And one of the things I'd like to ask you is, do you think that the corporate system, the financial investments, the financial investors and boards really understand? Are they awake to the kind of things that you are saying?
Oh, I'm sure they understand it, but I think what tends to happen is that their primary responsibility, if you're on the board of a bank, is the fiduciary responsibilities you have to your shareholders. And so at one level, you could say that everybody in our system is acting entirely rationally within the constraints of their responsibilities. But at the same time, whilst everybody is acting rationally within their context, the system isn't working. So if you represent a discrete set of shareholders, you have to take risks with their capital in ways in which you think are appropriate for them. And what we're seeing today, what I see every day in my role, in my current work as the chief exec of the National Wealth Fund, the private sector's appetite for risk hasn't really shifted. A lot of the conversations we have with actors in the private sector is they would like to engage in financing projects, but they would like to do it on their terms, where their risk appetite doesn't shift and their return hurdles don't shift.
Are they awake to the issues,
to transform
though,
the risk?
Are they awake to the issues?
Yes, I think they are. I think they're awake to the issues. I wonder, the question I would have for them is whether or not they are effectively engaging with their ultimate shareholders so that they can be confident they are executing on the wishes of their shareholders. Some firms have regular climate resolutions where they'll go to the shareholders with, this is our strategy, we could make a change, we could adopt the following policies, what would the shareholder base like us to do? I think that needs to happen more frequently for boards everywhere to remain confident that they are genuinely expressing the wishes of their shareholders.
And what do you mean by risk?
I understand it, Nick, but I'm not sure. I worry there's a disconnect between the view of shareholder requirements and actually what they want.
Sorry for jumping in there. What do you mean by when you say we need to take more risk? Who needs to take more risk? Is it the politicians? Is it the investors? Is it the boards? Is it the C-suites? Help me understand that.
It's everybody you've mentioned. It's the entire system, particularly in the UK. I think we've got a growth problem in the UK. I've said many times that I think the UK's growth outcomes are entirely consistent with the UK's appetite for risk. We've gone very much risk off. The story around the de-equitisation of our pension industry is a well-worn story. Everyone understands that. The government's, the range of government interventions for supporting business and for supporting new industries is very impressive. It's one of the first things that struck me when I stepped into my role in the public sector 4 years ago. We have grant mechanisms, we have business models that are designed and implemented by the government. We've got contracts for difference, regulated asset bases, and then organizations like ours deploying capital. So the government is already doing quite a lot, and we need to take yet more risk, policy risk and financial risk. But the private sector's got to come along with us too. The massive pools of private sector capital will be required to finance the transition. And it's not just, we don't just need to talk in notionals here. We need to talk about risk. We need to be clear who's going to shoulder the risk.
I'm just interested in the image and the reputation and the reflections here, because, and we've got about 3 minutes left, by the way, John. I mean, the Confederation of British Industry produced some remarkable data a couple of months ago, saying that actually net zero has created 950,000 jobs in the United Kingdom, worth £83 billion, and the jobs are worth between 10 and 40% more than they would have been otherwise. Why is that not resonating? Because we want to be as positive as we can. Help us understand why that is not resonating and what needs to be done now.
It's a great point. We do a lot of economic work as well around the impact of our investments, and there's nearly always an uplift in the value of the jobs for the new industries. So I think that the data that you referenced from the CBI is absolutely right. Why is it not resonating? It's a great question. I mean, partly there is the political imperative for politicians to speak out about the jobs that are lost. So we do hear a lot, and the media amplifies a lot, the cases where old industries need to be restructured or wound down. So we have this around ports, we have it around the steel industry, etc. So part of our ecosystem, we're hearing this message consistently that the new jobs are coming at the expense of the old jobs. But if you think about, if you just purely have a forward-looking lens on and you choose to be optimistic, the UK has got some very significant advantages. We are the first G7 nation to get to net zero. We have the best engineers, the best academics. We've got this broad range of government support mechanisms and a clear industrial policy and strategy that, well, will be further clarified in the coming weeks from this government. So there's a lot to be optimistic about. Investing in the sectors that will sustain us for the next century is something to be excited about.
Let me invite you to leave one final message, because you say it's going to be a lot harder in the final 50% of what has to be done. You say the status quo has to be changed, and people have got to realize that. So what's your message to people who are kind of dithering, saying, I'm not sure if I want to take the risk, it's going to be financially negative for me. I need to be convinced.
Yeah. So I think, without being too downbeat about things, I think we have to recognize that the alternative, the do nothing case, is actually not good enough for us. It's certainly not good enough for the planet. This country we gave the world the high carbon industrial revolution. I think we've got a bit of a moral responsibility to play a really meaningful role on this next journey,
And do you think mindsets can change, John, to achieve that in a way which is positive and in line with what you've been saying on our discussion?
They can. But the problem is, it's this problem where everybody's pointing at each other and looking. We have to do this collectively. We have to, if you have one person that takes some risk and it doesn't work out, then how does the environment respond to them? How does the ecosystem around them respond to that? Do they do what tends to happen with entrepreneurs in other countries? They get behind them and say, go again. Or do we kind of bemoan the fate of the failure? I think what we need to do is we all need to recognize that the current trajectory is not sustainable. We're going to have to change. That means coming off a path that is reasonably stable onto one that has got a lot more bumps in it, and then support each other when we hit those bumps. It can be done. We don't have a choice. The alternative kind of economic rebuild we've only experienced post-war. And that's not the alternative we want to be dealing with. What we want to be doing is we want to continue to decarbonize the next 50% on our own terms, taking people with us, using the skills and technology that the country possesses, and doing it in a way that people choose to sign up to.
Well, thanks, John. Even if there are bumps ahead, let's hope that the hard road will be addressed. I think there's a long way to go, but thanks very much indeed, not least for being pretty outspoken about this. So we appreciate that, and I'm delighted we've been able to hear what you've said. So thank you very much indeed. And you can reference every detail of what John has just given us. A transcript of the podcast is posted in parallel on our website, along with contact details for us and John at the National Wealth Fund. Do please join us when we have our next conversation about thinking the unthinkable. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, where you'll find all our podcasts, very much in the same vein and frankness as we just heard from John. So from me, Nik Gowing, until the next time, keep thinking unthinkables. More than ever, it's both possible and, as we've just heard from John, very necessary. So from both of us, bye-bye.